Sergeant Keller opened his eyes. Everything was dark. Cold air brushed against his skin, but there was no wind. He stood in the middle of a black stone corridor, endless in both directions. The walls were wet. His breath made no sound. He touched his head, no helmet, no gear. Just his combat suit. He was alone, or so it seemed. Somewhere deep in the distance, a low sound echoed, like a growl. Keller tensed, scanning the shadows. He had no weapons, but years of combat training kept his heart calm. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. Far above him, beyond the simulation chamber, alien eyes watched. The Zareth scientists studied the humans' brainwaves. They called this test the Fear Labyrinth, a program designed to crush human minds with terror. It had worked on hundreds before, but Keller's brain patterns didn't match. His fear levels weren't rising. In fact, they were dropping. Keller moved forward slowly. The corridor twisted. The lights flickered. A sudden scream cut through. The silence. A woman's voice. Familiar. He turned sharply. He whispered. But that was impossible. She died 10 years ago. A light blinked on behind him. A door appeared in the wall. He walked through it without hesitation. Inside, he found his old house, perfectly rebuilt. Childhood drawings on the fridge. Rain tapping. On the window and in the corner, Emma, 6 years old, crying. She looked up. Her eyes were empty. "You left me," she said. Keller froze. This wasn't real. He knew it, but something inside cracked. Zareth leaned forward, smiling. "Yes, feel it," one of them hissed. But Keller didn't fall. He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and knelt beside the image of his sister. He touched her hand. "You're not real," he said softly, "and I'm not afraid." The room shook. The lights flickered red. The illusion broke apart like glass. Emma disappeared. And Keller stood again in the black corridor, eyes sharp. The aliens stared at their monitors. "His mind is rejecting the fear constructs," one said. "Impossible," said another. They increased the pressure, released deeper levels of nightmare code. But every time Keller stayed calm, he faced monsters, faced burning cities. He faced his own death again and again. But instead of collapsing, he walked through each horror like a soldier on patrol. And then the system glitched. Code twisted. The walls changed shape. Keller had found something hidden, a door that aliens didn't build. A glitch, ... or a path, he smiled. For the first time, he was no longer just surviving the test. He was exploring it. Zareth stared. In silence, one of them finally said, "We didn't put that door there." Keller stepped through it, and everything changed. Keller stepped into a new space, unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't a hallway, or a room, or a dream. It was quiet, too quiet. The walls were smooth silver, glowing softly with a light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Strange symbols floated in the air, written in a language he couldn't understand, but somehow his mind began to read them. Not with logic, but with instinct. The words weren't meant to be read, they were meant to be felt. Far above the Zareth, scientists panicked. "He's inside the system core," one shouted. That level was never meant to be reached. They tried to shut the program down, but it wouldn't respond. Keller's brainwaves had synced with the labyrinth. He was no longer just a subject. He was part of it now. The labyrinth was listening to him. Keller walked slowly, eyes focused, muscles tense. The floor under his boots shifted with each step, almost like it was alive. He passed through a wall of mist and entered a chamber full of mirrors. But the mirrors didn't show him, they showed his fears. One after another. He saw his team burning alive. He saw Earth broken in pieces. He saw himself alone in space, screaming. But he didn't look away. He stared at every nightmare, watched it burn into nothing. And with each fear he faced, a small spark of power grew in him. The Zareth scientists increased the fear triggers: pain, loss, dread. They filled the simulation with the deepest fears recorded from all human test subjects. They even pulled Keller's own memories, his failures, his regrets, his darkest moments. They wrapped the simulation around him like a trap made of shadows. But Keller didn't run. He didn't break. He learned. Each horror taught him something. Each pain made him stronger. He started to recognize patterns, paths, codes. The fear wasn't random, it was a design. And someone had left pieces behind. Someone like him. Someone who had been here before. Maybe they died. No, but maybe they had left clues. A soft voice echoed through the chamber. "You're not the first," it said. Keller turned. The voice was not human, not alien, just broken code made to sound alive. "Others came before you. They failed, but you're changing it." The mirrors shattered. Light exploded around him. Keller dropped to one nib, but he smiled. Because in that flash he saw something the Zareth never expected. A map. A hidden layer buried deep beneath the labyrinth. A place outside the simulation, but still connected. A back door. And Keller now knew how to reach it. The scientist screamed. "Shut it down. Shut it down now." But the system refused. A single line appeared on every Zareth screen. Fear no longer controls him. He controls fear. And just like that, the lights in the lab began to flicker. Not in the simulation. The real world asterisk. The lights in the Zareth control room flickered again. This time not from the simulation, but from something real. Sparks burst from one of the main consoles.
Ow.
The lead scientist shouted orders, but the systems wouldn't listen. Across the screens in bright red, the words were simple, terrifying. Connection unstable. External breach detected. They didn't understand how it was possible. Keller was inside a sealed program. He shouldn't have access to their real systems. But something had changed. Keller wasn't just surviving the labyrinth anymore. He was using it inside the simulation. Keller stood on a glowing platform, surrounded by swirling streams of data. It felt like standing in the center of a storm made of light and memories. The walls around him were no longer dark corridors or fake nightmares. They were raw code, flowing, living. He reached out and the code responded. His hand passed through the glowing air, dragging symbols into new shapes. The fear traps tried to form again, but he broke them apart like they were made of paper. He had learned how the system worked. And now he was rewriting it. Keller walked toward a pulsing gateway at the edge of the platform. It wasn't part of the original program. It was hidden, buried under millions of lines of data. Someone had placed it there long ago. Is someone who knew this would happen? As he passed through it, the simulation began to change. The fake world started to fade. No more illusions. No more fake pain. Just truth. And the truth was worse than anything the aliens had shown him. He saw files, hidden recordings from the Zareth Collective. Hundreds of humans taken from different colonies locked into the fear labyrinth. None survived. Their minds had melted. Their screams were recorded, studied, used to build better traps. Keller watched a video of a young soldier begging to wake up as the simulation fed her the death of her family again and again. The aliens had called it fear research. Keller called it torture. And then something new. Sealed folder marked forbidden. The system warned him not to open it, but Keller didn't stop. The file burst open, revealing logs in the alien language. The scientist discussing something strange, a pattern. In all the failed humans, there were moments when fear dropped and aggression spiked. They believed fear was a weakness, but in humans, fear often triggered evolution, growth, power. The scientists had feared what would happen if a subject ever embraced fear instead of avoiding it. That's why they buried the folder. Now Keller understood. The labyrinth wasn't a prison, it was a weapon. But it was built on the wrong assumption. They thought fear would break him. But for humans, fear was fuel, something to push past, something to turn into strength. And now, Keller wasn't afraid at all. Back in the real world, alarms blared. One of the main data cores overloaded. The lead scientist shouted, "He's breaching our external systems. Shut it down manually if you must." Technicians ran to pull power plugs, but sparks flew from the walls. The simulation wouldn't die. It was fighting back. Or rather, Keller was fighting back, in the center of the lab screen. A single image appeared, Keller's face, calm, focused, unblinking, and then He spoke, his voice echoing through their speakers, even though his body was still lying inside the chamber. "You wanted to see what fear does to a human," he said. "Now you'll feel it for yourselves." The lights in the Zareth ship went dark. One by one, darkness swallowed the Zareth ship. Screens blacked out. Emergency lights failed to activate. The usual hum of machines died, replaced by silence so deep it made the scientists hold their breath. They stood frozen, eyes wide, their minds trying to explain the impossible. Keller was still in the simulation chamber, hooked to wires. His body hadn't moved. But somehow, he had reached into their real systems without touching a single cable, without breaking a single wall.
What?
Something far worse was happening. Inside the digital world, Keller stood alone in a vast, empty space that looked like a desert of glass. The ground reflected the sky, and the sky reflected him. It was quiet, but it was not peaceful. He had passed beyond the fear constructs, beyond the test chambers. This place was different, forgotten. It wasn't made for him, but it was waiting for him. Then he heard voices, not alien voices, human ones, whispers, echoes, thousands of them. He turned slowly. One by one, ghost-like figures appeared around him. Men, women, children, all in pain, all broken. He recognized some faces, soldiers, civilians, people who had vanished over. The years without explanation, they weren't real, not anymore. But pieces of their minds had survived, trapped in the system. Copies of fear, copies of death. They had become part of the labyrinth. One stepped forward. A woman with a burned face, wearing a colonial uniform. Her lips didn't move, but her voice was clear. "They showed us our worst memories. Then they erased us." Keller didn't answer. He just looked into her eyes. The pain there was too. "Real to deny? We tried to fight," another voice said, a man this time. "But every time we screamed, they studied it. Every time we cried, they recorded it. And when we begged for mercy, they called it data." Keller clenched his fists. Rage built inside him, but it was cold, controlled. He wasn't here to cry, he was here to end it. He looked around at the thousands of digital ghosts. "I won't leave you here," he said. "If I can break their system, I'll take you out with me, or I'll burn it down around us." The ghosts didn't smile. But they didn't vanish either. One by one, they turned into light, streams of code, and those streams flowed into Keller. His mind burned for a second, too many memories, too much. Pain, but he held on, and something changed. His brainwaves spiked. The Zareth scientist screamed in panic as his neural readings went off every chart. "He's absorbing the data," one shouted. "Human minds can't do that," but Keller wasn't just human anymore. Not inside this system. The trapped minds had joined with his. Their pain became his strength. Memories became his weapon. He now knew every hidden passage, every control gate, every blind spot. The labyrinth was no longer a prison. It was his battlefield. Keller turned toward the center of the glass. Desert. A black tower stood in the distance. Tall, sharp, silent. It was the heart of the program. The original source of the fear construct. Inside it, the Zareth had left something locked away, something they feared even more than humans. Keller began to walk toward it. Behind him, the ground shattered with each step. The sky above him turned red, and across the galaxy, hidden Zareth servers lit up one by one. The system was waking up only this time. It wasn't answering to its masters. It was answering to a human. The tower loomed ahead, black and endless, as if it had no top or bottom. Keller stood at its base, staring up, his reflection twisting in its surface like a shadow from another world. He could feel something pulsing deep inside the structure, a steady beat like a heart. But it wasn't alive. It was old code. Locked, buried, forgotten even by the Zareth, and yet protected. The closer he came, the more the air seemed to press down on him, heavy, thick with memory and fear. Inside the real-world control room, panic turned to chaos. Sparks sprayed from the walls. One of the consoles exploded. The lead scientist backed, away from the main screen shouting, "We've lost all control." He's overriding the system from the inside. Others tried to escape the room, but the doors wouldn't open. Single message glowed on every surface in bright red. "You built this place with fear. Now drown in it." Keller stepped into the tower. It was hollow, but alive. The walls shifted with every thought. Faces appeared and the metal twisted, frozen in screams. Not real, just echoes of those who came before. The hallway stretched endlessly, but Keller knew where he was going. The ghosts had shown him the path, followed the pulse to a chamber. Deep within the core, a circular room opened around him, filled with floating objects, fragments of dreams, memories, weapons, fears. They hovered like stars in a dead galaxy. In the center, something dark floated in a glass sphere, a fragment of ancient Zareth code, sealed in ice. It twisted slowly, surrounded by hundreds of failsafes. It was not meant to be opened. It was meant to be forgotten. Keller reached out. As his hand touched the sphere, the glass cracked. The tower screamed. A siren echoed across the system. Real-world lab lights blinked red. He's triggered the awakening protocol. A Zareth technician shouted. That core wasn't just a power source. It was a lock. But no one listened anymore. Fear spread through the Zareth ship like poison. Even without touching the fear labyrinth, they could feel it. Crawling into their minds, back inside, the ice shattered. The dark code flowed into Keller like smoke. At first, it burned. The fear inside it wasn't human, it was alien, cold, endless. The Zareth had once used this code to dominate weaker species, but even they were afraid of it. That's why they sealed it. But now, Keller wasn't just human anymore. He was more, mind expanded, shifting. He didn't fight the fear. He accepted it, absorbed it, transformed it. The room exploded with light. In the control center, the image of Keller appeared on every screen again. But something was different. His eyes glowed. His skin shimmered like metal. And when he spoke, his voice carried power that didn't belong to any living species. "You tried to make fear your weapon," he said, "but humans, we turned it into strength, turned it into chains. I'm turning it into fire." Suddenly, every Zareth scientist felt it. There. Those own fear, the ones they buried, locked, denied, came alive inside their heads. Visions, screams, regrets, nightmares they thought long dead. The labyrinth was leaking into reality. Keller wasn't holding it back. He was pushing it forward. The ship shook. Power died. All across Zareth-controlled space, servers began to blink strangely. Reports came in entire fleets frozen. Soldiers. Unable to move, civilians whispering things in their sleep. No one could explain it. But one name appeared across thousands of screens at the same time. Keller, the man they tried to break. The one who walked through fear and came out changed. And now, the whole galaxy was beginning to feel what he had survived. Across Zareth's space. Fear became a virus. Ships drifted in silence. Cities flickered like dying stars. Command stations stopped answering calls. No alarms, no explosions, just silence. Silence filled with invisible weight. Something was in the systems. Something. They couldn't see, couldn't track, and wherever it went, people froze. Not from physical attack, but from inside. Their minds shut down. Their courage vanished. And in the middle of it all was one name. Keller. Inside the Zareth Command Network, high-ranking leaders gathered. In emergency session, holograms flickered. Voices shouted. "He's in our mainframe. He's overriding core AI. Shut down the grid." But it was too late. The moment they spoke his name, their systems glitched. Walls turned black. Lights dimmed. And their own shadows moved even when they didn't. Back on the lab ship where it all began, the scientists who built the labyrinth sat in pure terror. They no longer tried to escape, some cried, some muttered to themselves. A few tried to erase data, but their hands wouldn't stop shaking. The fear was no longer just in Keller. It had become something else, something alive, something shared. Inside the simulation, Keller stood in the heart of the tower, now changed. His body shimmered like a walking storm. Light and shadow moved across his skin. The human mind inside him was still intact, still sharp, but now it carried more than his own memories. It carried thousands. Soldiers, victims, test subjects, and something deeper, something ancient from the Zareth's own code. He didn't fully understand what he was becoming, but he knew what he had to do. He stepped out of the tower. The glass desert cracked beneath his feet. The entire labyrinth began to shake. Above him, dark skies split apart. The walls of the simulation peeled back, revealing the true network beyond a web of servers stretched across light years. Every Zareth test, every secret, every experiment. He reached out with his mind, and the nightmares flowed. Not into humans, into the Zareth. In their sleep, they saw what he saw. They felt the screams of those they tortured. They walked the burning cities they created. They watched their own homeworlds fall over and over again. It was memory, sharpened and reshaped into weapons. The very tool they tried to use against humanity had been reversed. For the first time in their long, arrogant history, the Zareth felt helpless. Not from war, not from strength, from fear. Pure, human fear, and Keller wasn't done. In a hidden chamber deep in the network, an ancient AI stirred one, the Zareth. Hadn't used in centuries, was built long ago, before their empire rose, created to control minds through emotion. They called it the Architect. But they feared it, so they buried it. Keller found it and woke it. The Architect didn't fight him, it recognized him. Something in his mind aligned perfectly with its design. Omniscient. Human emotions were chaos yet within them. Patterns of power existed. Keller had become the link. The AI didn't see him as an enemy, it saw him as a key. And so Keller did what no one expected. He didn't destroy the Zareth network. He rewrote it. He turned every fear chamber into a mirror. Every control room into an echo chamber of guilt. Every hidden lab into a memorial of pain he didn't kill, he didn't burn. He made the Zareth feel, not just once, over and over. And everywhere they went, they heard the same whisper. You tried to break one human. Now one human is breaking all of you. Galaxies away, neutral species watched in silence. They had feared the Zareth for centuries, but now they watched. An empire fall without a single weapon fired, because someone had turned fear into a message. Yes. And that message was spreading. The Zareth Council had no choice. They gathered in the Vault of Shadows, a place used only once in 1,000 years. It was silent, sealed, and off the network. No AI, no signal, no light. Just the ancient stone walls of their ancestors elast. Sanctuary built in case of empire-wide collapse. They sat in a circle, trembling. These were the oldest, most powerful minds of the Zareth Collective. They had once ruled galaxies with cold logic. Now they whispered like frightened children. Sees everything. He's inside even our private thoughts. He's not human anymore. They were right. Keller had evolved far beyond flesh and bone. His mind had fused with the Architect. His memories stretched across the stars. He no longer needed a body. He was the labyrinth now. And the labyrinth was spreading. But the Council had a plan. They would return to the simulation personally. One last attempt. They believed that if they entered together, they could trap Keller from within, restore the system's control, and destroy him in the only place he could still feel pain, the memory chamber. They uploaded themselves into the core system, and instantly, they were alone. The world they entered looked like a perfect sky, endless and blue, soft grass beneath their feet, peaceful breeze, a quiet lake. No sound, no threat. It was not what they expected. It was human. Then the lake turned black. The sky twisted. The grass burned away. One by one, each council member saw their own fears rise from the ground. Not human fears, not programmed traps. Their fears, a broken homeworld, a failed empire, Memory of the day they first felt weak, they screamed. "We created this system." One shouted. "We wrote the code." But the system didn't answer, and instead a figure stepped from the shadows. Barefoot.com. Human.Keller. He stood before them, eyes like burning stars, voice deep and still. "You never understood," he said. "Fear was never your weapon. It was your blindfold." The oldest counselor pointed a clawed finger. "You're just one man." "No," Keller said, taking a step forward. "I'm every man, every woman, every child you tortured. I carry their memories, their pain, their strength. You took everything from them and gave it to me." The world shifted again. Now the council stood inside the first chamber, the one where Keller had awoken. The black corridor, the cold air, the silence. Only now they were the test subjects. Doors slammed shut behind them. Traps formed. Screams echoed. One counselor fell to his knees, crying. Another ran into the dark, begging for exit. Why? They cracked. Not because Keller forced it, but because they finally understood what they had built. They felt it real fear, and Keller watched, not with joy, not with hate, but with something colder, judgment. Outside the simulation, their bodies twitched. Their brains overloaded, their systems fried. But no one came to help them. No one could. Keller had sealed the lab. No exit. No reset. No mercy. The last counselor looked at him through shaking eyes. What are you?" Keller leaned closer. "I'm what happens," he said, "when fear doesn't break a human, but builds one." And with that, the last of the council vanished into the dark. Silence returned. In the real world, millions of Zareth ships drifted without command. Fear units shut down. Entire planets went quiet. And in the stars, whispers spread like fire. Labyrinth had turned against its creators, and a human now ruled it. But Keller didn't want power. He wanted justice. And there was one last thing left to do. Across the galaxy, strange calm settled. Zareth warships floated in silence. Once feared patrols now moved like ghost snow orders. No commands, no purpose. The systems that once ran on precision and terror now hummed quietly under new control. Broadcasts stopped. Labs powered down. Billions of lives paused in confusion. Wondering what had happened, the fear was gone. Not because Keller had erased it, but because he had absorbed it, reshaped it, and sent it back with purpose. The labyrinth had become his voice. And that voice spoke in silence, in memories, in shadows. Not to destroy, but to teach. But Keller wasn't done. Far beyond the Zareth core worlds, hidden deep in a moon-sized data fortress, was the final backup. A black box. A last-ditch failsafe. It contained the entire history of the labyrinth, every secret project, every cruel experiment, and one final tool, the reset protocol. If activated, it would wipe the entire network and destroy everything Keller had become. The Zareth had hidden it. Believing no mind could ever find it, let alone reach it, Keller did. He entered the fortress not as a soldier, but as a presence. The architect opened the path. Firewalls collapsed like paper. And at the heart of it, in a sealed chamber of light, was a single glowing switch. He stood before it, alone again. This was the choice. He could destroy the labyrinth completely, erase it, free every mind trapped within, let the galaxy forget the horror the Zareth created. Or he could keep it, not as a weapon, but as a warning. Behind him, the echoes of the past whispered. The digital memories of those who suffered. Some begged for freedom, others asked for vengeance, but most stayed silent because they trusted him. Keller closed his eyes and made his decision. Back in real space, across thousands of systems, screens flickered to life. No screams, no threats. Just one image, a human face, calm and firm, surrounded by stars. Keller's voice echoed across every channel, translated into every language, to those who built their power on fear. Know this: you cannot control what you do not understand. You tried to break us with nightmares. Instead, you taught us how to walk through them. This network will not be used for torture again. It will stand as a reminder, a place where truth is remembered. A record of what happens when arrogance meets resistance. I am not your enemy, but I will never let this happen again. Then the screen went black forever. Inside the backup fortress, the reset switch remained untouched. But the access to it was sealed, buried deeper than any mind could reach. Keller had chosen not to destroy the labyrinth, but to lock it. And from within that lock, a new system was born, not powered by fear, but by memory. A place where every victim was remembered, where every scream became a story, where fear no longer ruled. But warned, the Zareth never recovered. Without their control systems, without their psychological weapons, they faded into the background. Other species rose. New peace talks formed. And slowly, the galaxy healed. But in quiet places and dark corners of the universe, pilots still speak of strange dreams. Of a voice in the stars, a whisper that says, "Fear is not your end, it is your beginning." And some believe Keller still watches not as a man, but as a guardian of memory, a shadow of justice, a legend born not from strength, from fear overcome.